Welcome back to How We Love. I'm Robin Lane, psychologist and host, and my guest today is Craig Braun, a man who, although he has never stayed with one love for long, has nonetheless lived a lifetime of passion and artistry. Famous not for the music itself, but for the look of it. Craig designed some of the most iconic album covers in music history, winning countless awards and shaping how generations perceived rock and roll. Craig is a man who has done it all, and today we will let him tell us about his extraordinary life. Welcome, Craig Braun. It's an honor to have you on as our guest.
Well, thank you for the flattering remarks and the intro. Uh, I got to live up to something now.
Well, you've lived an extraordinarily glamorous life and hung out with some of rock and roll's most famous talents. So let's begin, though, with the backstory. How you became, how did you start getting into record graphic business from the very beginning?
Well, it was through the printing business. I took a job in New York in 1964 and worked for a printer. And I was hired as a new salesman, and I moved from Chicago to New York in April of 64. And I wasn't given any clients, so I had to ferret them out from the bushes. And one of them was RCA Victor Records, and the buyer called me one day and he said, "We need to promote a single. I'm not sure what it was, but I believe it was an Elvis Presley album, and it had one single, maybe Heartbreak Hotel, and then I forgot the one that I did, but this is many years ago, probably early 65, and I came up with a pressure sensitive label that they could put on the shrink wrap, and
What is
they
that? What is that? A
a
precious,
self-adhesive like band-aids. They when you take a band-aid out, it sticks to your skin. So
right?
that's an adhesive. It's called self-adhesive or pressure sensitive. And so it became uh, a merchandising gimmick that wound up selling many more albums than they anticipated. So I took that to all the record companies, and I became, in short order, the sticker king of the record industry. And then most of what's happened to me, I'll call it happenstance, or rather the accidents of life. Most of them uh, were me saying yes, even when I didn't know what I'm saying yes to.
Can you give me an
So
example?
London Decca, they had all of their acts coming from England, including Stones, Manavani, Engelbert Humperdinck, and so. But they signed a rock and roll band here in America in Detroit, and he said to me, "Do you think you could do an album cover? Because we get all the artwork from London, but we won't have any artwork. Could you do an album cover?" And I said, without a hesitation, yes. So I went ahead and designed this album cover, but I ran around to all of the record stores, the mom and pop stores. I mean, this is back in the 60s, and there were mass merchandisers like Sam Goody and Sears and so forth. And I just browsed through all the bins to see, photographs, illustrations, type handling, and that kind of thing. So I put together this album cover, and somehow it lit a fire inside of me. And very quickly, I thought, why do all album covers come in a 12 by 12 jacket format? Maybe I could do some other things, because I didn't have a traditional graphic design background. I think I had good graphic taste, but I started to come up with ideas for making album jackets more, let's say, proactive or more
Interesting. Making it more interesting.
more what?
Interesting.
Yeah, more interesting. So I wanted to get into kind of turning the tide and opening up a new window because all of the people that supplied the record industry, they were just basically the same people who had been doing it for decades after decades. So there weren't any creative people there. So I started putting a wheel in an album. I started to
What do you mean a wheel?
a eyelidded wheel so that you could pull it from the right side, and little windows that I had die cut on the cover would come up with. For instance, this was a Led Zeppelin album, so you'd get a picture on the wheel of Jimmy Page, who was the lead guitarist. And then in the other little windows on the front cover, you'd have his home, his Rolls Royce, and other things would come. So people they'd get high and they'd trip. Yeah, they tripped going through it with this wheel, listening to the record album. And then I did one for Joe Cocker. He had a tour called Mad Dogs and Englishmen, and I made the album fold out into a giant poster by using thinner board. I could fold and score the board. So when the consumer unwrapped the shrink wrap, they could start unfolding it like a napkin. And they had a giant poster of Joe Cocker with holding his muscle up in the air. And the tour was enormously successful. Uh, and so one thing led to another, and then I did an Alice Cooper package for a record that was coming out in I think in springtime, called "School's Out," and it was a hit single. So I did a school desk, an old school desk. I had one of my people, and then by this time I had 15 people in the art department, and I had them find an old antique desk like the ones we used to have when you and I went to school. There was a little die cut, there was a little hole in the upper right hand, and then there was a groove for putting your pencils and pens, and the ink bottles went in that little, you remember that little circle. And yeah, so I used that. I had it photographed and then I cut a middle section out of it, pushed it together and airbrushed it so you could not tell that this was in two pieces. And I carved the initials of all the band members in, and I had that flip up just the as you unwrap the album, you could lift up the top of the desk and look inside, and there was a slingshot and marbles and a comic book,
How do
Liberace comic book, and
that? I mean,
I had no stops, and I just did what I wanted, and people were buying it. So I put a pair of panties on Alice Cooper, even though he was a male singer. And so I got these paper panties from UK, and so everyone would open up the school desk and find the record is wrapped in this pair of women's panties. So
oh
it
my
was a
God.
monster success. And there's a little anecdote that comes afterwards because we had trouble getting the second. I bought 500,000 pairs of panties, and those came in by plane. But then I ordered 1,200,000 pairs of women's panties from London. And when they came in, it was the biggest snowstorm. This was in March of, I guess, 1972 or something like that. And so we couldn't clear them in customs, and they put up an objection. They said, but this is women's wearing apparel, and you have to either treat them to deflammatize them because they were paper. And I said, they're a promotional gimmick. No one's going to wear these. And they said, no, this by the rules, you have to cut the crotches out or you have to make them not flammable. So we found I said, we're not cutting the crotches. That's too sadistic. I said, we'll find a place where we can dip 1,200,000 pairs of panties up in Canada, but no trucks, nothing was moving. There was 8 feet of snow. I'm exaggerating probably, but so 2 weeks went by, and finally, my production guy says, we're shipping. they're going to arrive in Toronto tomorrow. Blah, blah. So I'm happy. So I said, call up Warner Brothers Records and tell them that we're going to have availability in the next 2 weeks. And we'll ship them out to all your pressing plants across the country. So he comes into my office with his head hanging below his chest and saying, Craig, they found someone in Mexico to make the panties. They were worried because of the story I told them, so they bought 1 million pairs of panties from this supplier in Mexico. So, needless to say, I was eating a lot of panties. So I told them bring my poster down here, which was it was a porcelain dog with his tongue hanging out, like a bulldog kind of thing. And I said, and I want you to, give me 8 pairs of the panties. And so I at my desk, I wrote in block letters, I can't believe I ate the whole thing. And then I told him to tape it to the dog's mouth and roll these up and send them air freight to the president, the CEO of Warner Brothers, all the major executives. So their vice president of creative director called me the next day, Stan Cornan, and he was in this chairman's office, and these guys were laughing their ass off. And he says, Craig, I can't believe what you sent us. I said, well, you guys screwed me. I got you across the country controversial article. It was in UPI. And, I told this reporter, Lee Zito, at the Washington Post, that the government was holding up the release of this School's Out album, and it went all the way across the country. And this is the reward I get. I've created this momentous cover, and you're buying the panties from someone else. And he said, we just thought we're going to take the panties whether we need them or not. And I said, well, that was very smart. And he said, what do you mean? And I said, if you didn't, I was going to put in a helicopter the 1,200,000, maybe 2 helicopters, and drop them all over the Warner Brothers film lot. And I heard Joe Smith, who's the president of Warner Brothers, he said, would this guy do that? And Stan, the guy on the phone with me, and he said, yes, he would. He's fucking crazy, this Craig Braun. So I said, you saved yourself a big cleanup, my man, and showed a little appreciation for what I've done for you. So those are the kind of things that would happen when I'd step outside the format of how a record is packaged. And I did, Cheech and Chong. I did so many. I did, oh man, so many different kind of custom covers like this. And of course, the bands and their managers and their producers came to me because they wanted something different than a conventional cover. So anyway, that's what happened. And for me, I would do a Carpenters and a Rolling Stones package at the same time. I'm the guy who put the zipper on the Rolling Stones package, the Sticky Fingers.
Can you explain that, because this is audio, so the audience can't see it?
Well, it's a cover that has the front part of a man wearing a pair of jeans, and
it's only from the waist to the thigh.
Yeah, from the belt line.
Craig, the crotch is very noticeable.
Yeah. Though the crotch was noticeable because in those days, we're talking about 70, 71, tight was the thing. And then it goes through different periods, where sometimes jeans were baggy, but they were very tight, and they were called French jeans. And a lot of young people were buying French jeans because the women couldn't even wear underwear. They were so tight. They would use Kleenex. So I had him take one of the guys. I called Andy and I said, I want you to shoot some Polaroids for the new Stones album. And he was the guy who inspired the zipper, because he was at Hippopotamus one night at a club, and Mick came over to him and he said, Mick, I have a great idea for you. We should put a zipper on the next album.
You talking
So
about Mick Jagger?
yeah, so Marshall Chess was running their label, and he calls me up. He says, "Can a zipper go on a cover?" I said, "I don't think so. It could be a lot of damage, both sides of the zipper." He said, "Well, Mick and the Stones really want that." So I spent like a month working on different constructions with different construction people. I had people come in that were from architects to designers of cosmetic packaging. And I finally came up with a way of incorporating the zipper on the front cover,
Which was?
which was about a 5-inch zipper. And the I had the panel open up so that the fabric on both sides of the zipper could be adhesive, could be adhered. And then, the albums go down an assembly line, a conveyor belt, and they have time to dry. And then they're put in boxes, and I had them staggered like Chinese laundry, does with shirts. And so I get a call, and Andy did the photographs. And I know in the last minute,
You're talking about Andy Warhol.
yeah, Andy Warhol. And I said, Andy, we got the front. I'm not worried about the pull of the tag of the zip, but the back, even though it's flat, it could dent the tracks because we're dealing with vinyl here. So I said, I got to put another panel in behind the cover, and I want you to get the same guy and put him in tidy whities. I want him in tight jockey shorts. And I want him to play with himself before you start shooting pictures because we're showing this semi hard on.
You wanted him to have an erection.
Well, a quasi one, not a full erection. That would have been pornographic. But so he says, Craig, what a wonderful idea. And so, Andy and I had some history because we did the Velvet Underground together. That's the album that had a giant banana sticker that you could peel. I don't know if you've ever seen the cover, but it was the first John Cage and Lou. Oh, who was the creative guy? Lou. Anyway, so we did that in '67. So that Andy and I had already had a relationship. We had become friends, and then the Stones thing came up, and so he did all the Polaroids, and I said, I want this one with the underwear to be in color. And I want you to send me your stamp, property of or photographed by Andy. And I'm going to put it where it usually has a jockey logo. I want to stamp it there, Andy Warhol. We're going to sell a lot more albums with your fucking name on it, for sure. So I was always thinking about the consumer and how to grab the impulse consumer, no matter what the products were. I had this marketing savvy, and I was a pretty good idea guy. So anyway, we went ahead with this, and then I get a call from Ahmet Erdogan's brother, Nesui Erdogan. He says, well, we're going to put you out of business. And I said, what are you talking about? And he said, well, there's this track on side 2, the Sister Morphine track on the new Stones album, and we're getting a lot of returns because there's the dent mark. So that's when I called. And I put this extra panel in to solve the problem. And apparently, I did some experimentation. I realized that could still be a problem. So Nestle was saying to me, why don't you print the fucking zipper? I told you that in the first place. I said, look, the Stones want this. Your brother Amit agreed to it. So don't come after me and say you're going to put me out of business. They wanted this. They asked me to develop it. And so he said, well, you better fix it. So I stopped everything. And I stayed in my office till about 1 o'clock in the morning playing with that jacket and trying to figure out a way to protect the records that were in these boxes. I'd never had any idea that they were going to stack like 20 cartons on top of one another. And so in a truck where it's bouncing up and down, that's how the damage occurred. So I'm playing with it. I'm very high. I'm probably doing several lines of cocaine and smoking some dope. And I think, let me see what will happen if I pull the zipper down, all the way down. And I did that and I put an album on top of it. And the dent that was being caused was now in the center disc label where they have all the song titles of what's on the record. And who gives a shit about that, you know? So I called Nestle the next morning. I said, I got the solution. We're going to have little old ladies down at the end of the conveyor belt, and we've got to extend it because we want that glue to dry. And they're going to be pulling these zippers all the way down. And he said, is that going to work? I said, yeah, it's going to work. He said, 100%. I said, yeah, 100%. It's going to work. There's going to be a dent, but it's going to be in the center disc label. And nobody cares about that. So he says, okay, roll. And we did it, and the album became a monster success. And some of it was due to the fact that it was in this unusual cover with a guy with a guy's rear end on the back, you know, really tight ass, great young guy, and
Well,
and with the
back then, I mean, back
yeah.
then was pretty shocking.
Yeah, well, you know, Sears refused to take it, and a lot of mass merchandisers, you know, they thought of their record stores as family stores, so they didn't take it to start the release. But then when it started selling like hotcakes, I think they jumped in and said, let's compromise, you know, like we do in today's political world. So anyway, the record was a huge success, and my business model was to design for free, but I manufactured the package. So therein lies, you know, my big paydays because I was getting royalties just like the Stones for the packages.
Let me
No
ask
one,
you something.
no one had ever done that.
You're,
Album designers, they charge a couple of $1,000s for a cover, and I was not in it for that.
no, you're just enormously creative, Craig. But let me ask you something. What was your life like at that time, aside from the business aspect? What was your personal life like?
Well,
Because you had, I know you were married many times. You had,
Well, I was married twice. Yeah. I married a stewardess in 61 and had a child at 62, my first son.
when, which
And
son is that?
his name is Timothy Braun. And you know, he worked for CNN and ABC. He was a journalist. You know, he did a lot of their stories. And now he has his own production firm, and he's very successful. And
And that marriage lasted how long?
6 years.
Okay, not
And then
not
about,
great staying power. And the next one?
well, the next child came from a brief love affair in Paris. And a woman whose family owned a hotel in the Marais, she came to New York and she knew of me. She had met me socially. And so we wound up spending a weekend together. She got pregnant, and I didn't know about it. She called me a couple of months later and said, I'm pregnant. And I said, well, why are you calling me? Who is it? And she says, I've only slept with one person in my life, and it was you.
Oh my God.
So she said, I'm calling you, and I know this doesn't sound like an American woman would say, but I would like your permission to have the child.
Oh my goodness.
And I was adopted, and my mother was from Ireland with her family in Chicago, and she got pregnant at 17, and you know, they moved her to Michigan or Wisconsin for the last couple of months, and then she gave the baby up for adoption. And
You're talking about you.
yeah, me, to a place called the Cradle Society in where the hell was it? In Evanston, Illinois. And my parents were on the list to get a son or daughter. Anyway, so I was adopted there. I was a very sickly kid. They tried to dissuade her, which means I wouldn't be on the phone with you. I wouldn't be on this right now. They said, listen, he's got a rash over 90% of his body. He keeps losing weight. We can't find a formula like a Similac or something. So why don't you wait for the next boy? And she said, she told me this story. She said, no, I want to come in. I want to see him because you say it's my turn and we've been waiting for months. And so she saw me and she said something that you might say to someone is selling you a used car, and you say, "Do you mind if I take this car to my mechanic and have it checked out?" And she said,
This is the mom that adopted you.
"Yes, yes, my adoptive mother." And she said, "I'd like to take him to my doctor, if you don't mind." And they said, "Well, it's a strange request, but because he's sickly, yes." So she took me to the doctor. He said, "This is your child. don't don't release this. Don't wait for another one. We'll fix him. We'll find the right formula. You'll be taking him out in the sunshine 40 to 45 minutes a day. We're going to clear up the rash." And so, and here I am talking to you.
Apparently, how you live. But let's
Yeah,
go
so
back to the child with the French woman. What happened to that son?
oh yeah, so I said, she said, I called you, asked permission. So I said, give me a few days. And I deliberated and I called my sponsor in AA and I talked to him at length a couple of times. And he said, listen, if you have no relationship or the prospect of a relationship with her, but you were adopted in such a situation, and if that motivates you to give her a yes, just put in a letter form that you will not be responsible. She shouldn't look forward to a father who participates in the life. And so write this letter. He gave me the 4 or 5 deal points, and I did. I called her. I said, "It's okay. Go ahead." And he was born, and she gave me a call and said it was a difficult birth and some problems. And I said, "Well, I'm glad he's alive, and I'm glad you're happy." She said, "I couldn't be more happy. I knew a lot about you because I knew this woman that you were deeply in love with, and her sister was a friend of mine, so she told me all about you. You know what you did, what your personality was, and all this stuff. So I'm so happy that it was a successful birth." And then she called me about 8 months later and she said, listen, there's no obligation, but if you have any interest in seeing the child, we're going to baptize him at a small church on Ile Saint Louis. And it's just going to be a small baptism, just, my relatives. And if you wanted to come, no one's going to point a finger at you, and to see your child. And I just said, yes, I'll be there. And so I showed up. And the moment I picked up this little creature, I looked in his eyes. I saw myself, and it was like a brand of love.
You fell
I
in
had
love.
never felt this kind of love. And so we wound up being connected for quite a few years. And then her best friend told me her design was always to marry you. It wouldn't be a surprise to know that she planned her trip when she knew she'd be ovulating. I said, really? She said, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. uh, so
Great,
uh,
great, great. That was
yeah,
you were a big name at that time, right?
yeah, I was big. I somehow had this kind of gift of talk and charm. And so any place I wanted to connect, like, Women's Wear Daily, I was in that crowd. I was in the John Richard, the intellectual crowd. I was in all of them, but I was a bounce in, and I went to the places like Elaine's. I was there 4 or 5 times, in Mortimer's, and I had my own table there and stuff like that. So yeah, I'd become like a social butterfly, and all of this.
And were you stoned during most of this period?
Yeah, yeah, I was probably in the bathroom as much as I was sitting at the table.
What
And Elaine used to come in, and she'd bang on the women's door. She'd be saying, "Craig, get out of there," because I was always in the ladies' bathroom, putting coke in the noses of all of these victims that I had. But I
what
was I was kind of a
victims
cute guy back then.
wait a minute. What do you mean victims that you had?
What?
What do you mean victims that you had? What are you talking about?
Well, victims, I don't know whether they're victims.
I think
They
what
were
I think
consensual
what you're
victims.
saying is that you bought a lot of coke and you gave it to a lot of women, which was
Yeah, yeah.
so you must have spent a hell of a lot of money that way.
I spent a fortune. Yeah, I called it my $100,000 a year diet, and in today's dollars, that would be probably 250. But anyway, and I was
How
at.
much money do you think you threw away on drugs?
Oh man, I don't know. I don't want to know.
No, come on,
It's a
give me
lot
a
of
ballpark.
money. It's let's say it's 10 Jaguars, 10 10 cars from Britain. But
So you're
and so,
talking about $1 million or more.
oh, I don't think a million, no, but maybe if six figures, between 100 and 250, let's say.
In those days, right?
Yeah.
Which would be different
Well,
money
you
today.
know, I was loaded a lot of time because I was mixing a lot of drugs too. So I was doing, I had started doing heroin. So
Oh
heroin and
no.
coke together.
What made you use heroin? That was dangerous stuff.
I told you the secret to my success and my failure was saying yes. So I said yes a lot. And
No, come on, I'm
but
not,
I
no,
wasn't
no, no,
doing no
no,
this.
Craig, I'm not gonna let you get away with that. Seriously, what made you take heroin and how did you take it? You injected it? How did you take it?
No, no. I promised myself that I would never put a needle in my arm. So I was snorting the coke.
Okay,
I was snorting the
heroin.
heroin.
Let me
But
ask you, let me
in the years we're talking about right now, I was basically doing cocaine was my drug of choice, but I did a lot of tripping too. With mescaline and LSD and purple pain and stuff like that.
why? Why?
I I didn't feel right in my skin. I wasn't comfortable in my skin, and I wanted to change how I felt about myself. I wanted to become oblique to my life in a way. So I
That's so
numbed
strange
myself
because you were
out.
so talented and you were so accomplished.
Yeah, but I can give you a list of 25 people that follow that exact description of
Yeah,
them, and they
yeah,
died. They
yeah.
died of drugs. So that's it's really, I think, boils down to a low self-esteem or self-worth that uh, uh, I never thought this consciously, but I had an act where people in their eyes would see me in a certain way as being much more than I was.
What do you mean?
Like an actor, like this charm that I had, and I was physically attractive, and I had, a lot of coin, and I lived in an enormous carriage house on 69th Street, so my parties were, anyway, it was that life of having all the toys and cash and chicks.
So there was a lot of glamour and very
Yeah, a lot of
a lot of
glamour, a lot of
excitement. Yeah.
glamour. Yeah, fashion world. I was big time in there. I had two very big love periods with Diane von Furstenberg, for instance.
Exactly.
In the 70s and the 90s, we reunited. But yeah, and royalty, probably a few princesses too. I remember Giovanna Pignatelli. We had a mad, crazy time. She lived in Rome, uh, Piazza Priscilla. But anyway, yeah, I women were another addiction to me. I think something to change how I felt about myself, and these women would become they would they'd fall for me, and I couldn't love myself in those years. I was proud of these incremental successes I was having because they were keeping the boat afloat. But my if I really went within myself, I didn't find much to value there. And maybe part of that stems from the fact that I found out I was adopted when I was 9. And it was a devastating discovery for me.
What,
So,
why? Why? What was that like?
well,
How did you find out?
I found out I was rummaging around in this cabinet in my where I lived in Chicago, and where my mother would keep the linens and the tableware and all that stuff. But I found a document, and at the top of it, it said the Cradle Society, and then it said a sentence about this child is now adopted and shall be named Sonny Braun. And so I was floored because finally the coin dropped. I didn't look like my father. I didn't look like my mother. All my schoolmates, they looked like their parents. So it just dropped, and it dropped in such a way that I thought I must have been given away, and I I think my whole consciousness went blank in that moment. And I never had the courage to approach my mother about it, but I said to her about 35 years later, I said, something that's always been in my mind is when I discovered at 8 or 9, I think I was 9, that I was adopted, my mind went blank. I don't know what happened after that. She said, well, I do. I remember it so well because I cried the whole afternoon. I was making the beds upstairs, and you came running up the stairs, and you wrinkled up that paper and you threw it at me and said, if you paid more than a nickel for me, you got gypped.
Oh my God.
So, as an actor, I discovered that anger is a false emotion. It usually is covering hurt or fear.
Pain.
And
Pain.
yeah, pain. Yeah. So the reason I bring that up is I think that planted a low self-worth in me that I had been given up, you know.
Ah,
Uh,
I
that,
see. I see. I,
so that's why it was a scar that never healed. It was, oh God.
I understand what you're saying. But
Yeah, I was devastated.
wait, let me ask you one more. How many years were you stoned?
Mm, I'm going to say 25 to 39, 15 years.
15 years. And
Uh,
what
I
made
was, but prior to me starting that, I started with alcohol. I started drinking heavy, 100%, like Stolichnaya and Beefeater martinis and stuff like. Because I was really not a connoisseur of taste, but I wanted to get high. I wanted to change my consciousness.
you like
So
you like the feeling?
yeah, I didn't have much regard for myself. Let me say that. And I didn't. The more successful I became and got these, checklists of all the toys and prizes, I'd feel good for with a tailor-made suit from London or something. I'd feel good for a week, and with a new, I collected old Porsches. I'd get an old Porsche. I bought that same car that James Dean died in, not his car, but the same model of that sports car. And so
How many Porsches did you have?
at one time, I had four in the carriage house where the horses used to be tied up. Yeah,
Oh my God.
yeah,
Oh my gosh.
yeah. And I had
Women
started to
must have
fly.
gone nuts for you. They must have gone nuts for you.
Yeah, well, here I am, a decent-looking bloke.
You're a good looking guy and you have all this stuff.
Yeah.
And you're hanging around with famous people. So women must have gone nuts for you.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. They did, and I needed to be loved. I mean, I needed the look in their eyes and the kisses and the caresses and the sex. I needed all of that to kind of give me yet another high. So I would say that that was another addiction of mine. Women became an addiction, and as sex became an addiction. So I was very chameleonic about my needs to change Craig,
But let
and
me ask you
I
something.
never went inside myself. Never.
Craig, let me ask you something. Why in the world did you stop?
Uh, I had overdosed.
Stop.
Yeah, I was now in my late 30s, and I had gone through a lot of trials, literally, and tribulations. I was indicted for tax evasion, um, and I was sentenced to 2 years in prison and
Oh my God.
22 months suspended. So I got this famous lawyer who was the attorney general under Lyndon Johnson to represent me. He was very, very expensive. And so, and then I had letters written for the pre-sentencing probation officer and from all over the world, saying that I was a gemstone of a person and a remarkable person, and that I should not go to jail. This is my first offense, and so the thing mushroomed, and uh, the judge gave me a long lecture when he sentenced me about, very few people have the wherewithal that you had to hire Boris Kostelanetz to represent you, and you're going to be an example for white collar criminals. And that was the gist of what he said. So I have to sentence you. And he sentenced me to 2 years, and he suspended 22 months. And he said, so you can spend the 2 months in the tombs here. I don't know if you ever heard of the tombs.
Yes, I did.
Yeah. Uh, so this is crazy. So I start thinking, like I did about solving the zipper thing. And I call up, Gerald Ford had just pardoned Nixon for the Watergate thing. So I call up Boris and I said, I want you to make a motion to Judge Frankel to dismiss the sentence, to waive the sentence, because I'm I'm I've committed crimes that are far less grievous than President Nixon, and that motherfucker walked. He didn't even have to go through the judicial system. He said, "Yeah, yeah, I know all that." So I said, on that basis, and the talk he gave me about being an example for white collar criminals, I want you to throw it in his face. And so he said, it's going to cost you some money, and it's probably not going to do anything, because the book entitled Criminal Sentencing was written by Marvin Frankel, your judge, and it's used in every law university in the country. Criminal sentencing. There's no way he's going to change it. So I said, do it anyway. So I get the notice. I have to show up to be fingerprinted and the photographs on a Friday, and then I have to surrender to uh, the prison on Monday. So I'm down at 100 Center Street, and they do the fingerprinting and the pictures, and I leave, and I'm so down. I get to my back to my carriage house, and I'm putting out. I have this glass table. I'm putting out these wavy lines of Coke, and I get my secretary says, and by this time I had lost the business. I had lost everything. And I still had a secretary in my carriage house, my bunker. And she says, there's someone on the line. He says, very important to talk to you. So I said, who is it? And she said, I don't know. He didn't give his name. So I pick up the phone, and the guy says to me, my name is Gabe Pressman, and I'm with, I don't know, WNET or something like
I
that.
don't remember him.
And he said, I said, who is this? Who the fuck? I thought this was one of my friends, because they had sent me prison suits and balls and chain,
Oh, God.
balls and bowling balls and chains and shit.
God.
So, uh, so, so I gotta say this. I said, is it true? He said, yeah, we all went down to the courthouse because we heard that a man was pardoned because of the Nixon pardon, and you're that guy. He said, your street, 69th Street, is going to be packed with buses, trucks, and all kinds of reporters. And
Oh,
you're going to
God.
be in every newspaper in the country. So I, I'm flabbergasted. So he's asking me what my reaction was and so forth. And I didn't want to tell him that I inspired this, but he said, we didn't even have your name. Your name wasn't on the documents. Only the case number. So all the reporters had to do like some diligence to find out who was this number. And it turns out it was you. So we know where you live, and you're going to be in the news. And
Well, let me go back. But still, so you were still getting high. What made you stop?
so I would say 20 years later.
No, not 20 years later.
Let's see, 39. Yeah, about 20 years after I started my addiction.
Made you stop?
Yeah, so I had lost the carriage house and I lost everything that I owned, and I was deep in debt. And the government, when it's a tax evasion case, they have these German Shepherd kind of forensic accountants that go through your
Oh,
books. And
God.
I
No.
had three corporations. They went through all of those, and I went through my personal for 7 years, which is the limit. So that was 28 audits that I went through. And so I wound up owing them a lot of money. I think 285,000 or something, and the interest on that, it's astronomical. It's like a small insurance, a small loaning company, cash. The interest is like 10% a year or something like that.
Oh,
So
God.
and I was broke. And a friend of mine from Chicago who used to be a DA under Richard J. Daley in that dynasty, he had to escape and he moved to Santa Monica. And he called me and he said, "Why don't you come here, Craig? Come here, live with me." And I knew that his practice was defending drug dealers and drug smugglers. So I said, okay, okay, I'm moving to Santa Monica. So I wound up moving, and he would always tell these drug dealers, bring the cash and also bring a bag of the goods, So we'd always have a lot of drugs.
But what made you stop?
Well, I was there for a couple of years, and I had a couple of really close calls where I almost bought the farm.
What do you
And
mean? What do you mean almost bought the farm?
well, bought the farm means you die.
Can you give me an example of what you're talking about?
Yeah, heroin overdose.
What happened?
You collapse. You have almost a seizure. You collapse, and the lights go out in your eyes, and you're on the edge of death.
Why didn't you die?
I don't know.
Was there
When I look at it's
was
just another accident.
there somebody there that rescued you?
Well, yeah, there was people there, but this guy I was living with, but he was a heroin addict too. In fact, we got so bad and we knew it that we decided we need just to maintain our intake every day. So we opened an account, got a savings safety deposit box at the Security Pacific Bank on Santa Monica in the 405, and we put the heroin and the coke in a safety deposit
No,
box.
no,
Yeah, but every morning we would
no,
go there at 9 in the morning, be the
no.
first ones in line waiting for the bank to open. And so we would go in and we fold up these packets and put them in our pockets, and do a few lines just to get out of that room, the private room, and then all of a sudden the clerks would be saying, "Hey, hey, have a great day." In those days, "Have a nice day" was the slogan of Los Angeles. But anyway, yeah, but it never really worked because, by 5 or 6 o'clock, I'd say, got to make a call to a dealer, so it just went
What
from bad to
made you
worse.
stop?
But,
I want to know what made you stop.
well, I went, his sister had a couple of head on accidents, and she was a Quaalude junkie, which is a cheap, like a lightweight heroin drug, Quaaludes, Rohrer 714, I think they were. And people use them for sex because it gave your skin a tingling sensation. And if you combined having a Quaalude and poppers, you know, uh, that you would snort, and you would get so high, that sex became a whole different experience. Anyway, I don't want to go into details about that, but she had a couple of very bad car accidents, and she had told Mike, my buddy, she said, I started going to these AA meetings on West Ohio Street, but I'm nervous about going there, and would you go with me? And he said, well, I'll see if Craig will come along. And so I said, get her a jar of Quaaludes, and I'll go. So he gets the jar and he gives me a couple of Quaaludes, and so we take her to this AA meeting. And this is LA in the 70s, so uh, I'm uh, I'm walking in tentatively. I never, I saw Ray Milland in The Lost Weekend and Days of Wine and Roses, but I'd never been to an AA meeting, and I didn't know what they were about. But I walked in and I thought they were just going to be old men with, bottles hanging out of their raincoats. And but there were a lot of young people, and they rushed over welcoming me. And I said, no, 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 no. I'm here for her. She's got a real problem. And so I just agreed to join her. And I was high at that moment. So she said, "Can you sit with me?" And I said, "Yeah, yeah, yeah. We'll sit with you for the meeting." And then this guy got up, a red-faced Irishman in a suit, tailored suit, and he started marching back and forth in front of the podium, screaming, "Life is now in session. Life is now in session. Let's get it on." And this disease is going to cut you off too short to hang up, and he went into this thing where he sounded like a cult leader. And in those days, you could throw a rock, and within a block, you could hit two cults. This is the mid 70s, man. So I dismissed it, but I found the guy funny, pathetic, and he was admitting things that he did that I would never have said. I turned to my friend Mike and I said, "This motherfucker's crazy. He's telling all of his sins. He's telling everything he did that was insane." And so he said, he looked at me with this quizzical look. So he was saying the most embarrassing things you ever heard. and screaming throughout, "Life is now in session." And, and so I kind of got a boost from it. Through my high, I felt this is a good place. And all the people's eyes looked sincere, and they were talking to me, not like they were looking behind me for who they wanted to talk to, but they were talking to me like they really cared. They wanted to know how I'm doing, and I was just touched by the sincerity, the level of self-honesty that they had, and I kind of wanted to be that way. But I was always this show guy, a soft shoe shuffler. So I was attracted to it, and I said, when you go to another meeting, I want to come with you. So I went to another meeting, and I saw a guy named Clancy,
Wait a second. Were you high at the next meeting?
probably a little. And then the guy was very funny. It was like being in a comedy store. So I got his phone number from him because he was saying, "Get phone numbers, get phone." So I said, "I want your phone number. I don't want those people's phone number." For me, I was different. My case was different. I wasn't like all these other people, but I wanted to call him and see where he's
Wait a minute.
speaking.
You
So
felt, wait a second. You felt you weren't like all these other people because you were a celebrity?
I think I had a heightened, yeah, self-image that was pseudo. It wasn't real, but when I would see the people, I'd say, "Well, look how they dress, fucking jumpsuits and Orange County and, stitching on the side and their phony beads and shit." And so I said, you have to know it's the 70s. And so I separated. I and so I went to I called this guy and I said, "Are you speaking tonight?" He said, "Yeah, I'm speaking in Mid Wilshire." So I said, "Well, give me the address and the time." And he said, "No, I'll pick you up." I said, "No, I don't need to be. I have a car." He said, "No, I'm going to pick you up. That's what we do." And I thought maybe this guy's gay and he wants to pick me up and take me to the meeting. And I said to him, "No, no, no. If you don't want to tell me where it is, don't. But I don't want to be picked up." And so he said, "I'll give you the address." And so I went. I saw the guy. He spoke, and it was the funniest. He was as funny as Lenny Bruce. And I went up to him afterwards and I said, "Man, I like where you're at, and I love your story, and I'm going to keep coming to these meetings." And he said, "Well, how sober are you?" And I said, I'm not sober, but I want to get on this train." And so that's what changed me. That experience of,
How long did it take you to get on that train?
well, after about 3 or 4 months, uh-oh, I have to cancel. I've got a 4:30 at the physical therapy place down the street.
So we're gonna have to stop.
Yeah, can we pick it up at 6 at 5:30 or 6?
It doesn't matter. We can stop now because what I want everyone to know is that you have been sober for what, 40 years, right?
46 years, April the 1st. I got sober on April the 1st, 1979.
You are now an accomplished actor. You
Yeah,
have
we should talk about the acting because there's a lot of stories there. Maybe we do two parts. Can your son edit this thing? Because I went on too long with these
actually, to
stories.
be honest with you, it's one of the first interviews I've done where I don't want to do any editing. But let's say goodbye. Okay, let's say goodbye and I'll talk to him and see what we can do. But
Yeah, yeah. I think you have to cover uh, that moment of when I changed the way I was living and all of the chemistry I was living with to what self-discovery, and that is the biggest mission of my life, was to finally go inside and find out who the real Craig was. And that's a fascinating story, if I say so myself. So I think there should be a part two.
okay, let's see if we can arrange that.
Okay,
All right,
sweetheart.
John.
Yeah.
Thank you, Craig.
Ciao.